Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our I was just about to say very last, but it's not nearly close to the very last. Welcome to our third poetry type, which are riddle poems, which I was talking about a little bit when we were sharing our haiku on Tuesday. These ones are really fun poems to write, and they're really fun ones to share. So I'm excited to hear what you have come up with today at our Zoom meeting. But let's go through what a riddle poem is and what skills it's working on. So a riddle poem, they're poems that use metaphor, simile, hyperbole, and analogy to represent a really familiar item in a brand new way. And hopefully, as I was listing those words, metaphor, simile, hyperbole, they were kind of familiar to you because we have talked about these a little bit when we were doing our descriptive writing. So those should be terms that are coming back to you and you're ready to review a little bit rather than being brand new. So the purpose of a riddle poem, as I've sort of mentioned, let's move over there, is that it really forces writers to be able to represent or talk about everyday items in really new creative ways, so that we can sort of get a hint about what the item might be without ever actually being told what the item is. Okay, it's a really fun little way to practice our figurative language. So let's just have a quick review of some of these. Move over there again. Some of these types, oh my goodness, that's not what we want. Here we go. Some of these types of figurative language. So remember, figurative language are things like similes, metaphors, hyperbole, and we're just going to have a quick review of what those are. So a simile, remember, is when we compare two dissimilar things using like or as. And the word dissimilar is a sneaky word because what it really means is not similar. Two things that are quite different, okay? So a few examples here. The man was as big as a mountain. Men and mountains are not the same thing. They're not even really very similar. But we're using the qualities of a mountain to help us describe the qualities of this man. So the mountain is big and vast, and this man is also really large. Okay, that's kind of the gist of a simile. So another example is biking up the hill was like climbing Mount Everest. Okay, so we're using the difficulty, the physical difficulty of climbing Mount Everest to really highlight or explain the difficulty of riding up a really large hill on your bike. Okay? Let's have a little peek at metaphor. So metaphor is doing the same thing, but sometimes using different words and sometimes not even using that little hint word that helps to tell us that it's a simile or a metaphor. So a metaphor is comparing two dissimilar things, again, things that are different, things that are not similar. Also to highlight some similarities between them. So an example, my brother is a teddy bear. So we're using all that softness and cuteness and cuddliness of a teddy bear to highlight or represent the fact that this person's brother is really gentle and maybe kind of good for a hug, okay? Another example is, and this is such a classic one, we've all heard this one, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. So again, we're using sort of the bitterness of those lemons, that bitter, shocking taste of those lemons to really highlight or represent a situation that is like that. A situation that is sort of bitter and unpleasant and unexpected in life, okay? And this one I like because this one, you'll notice, doesn't give us that beautiful is or was or like or as. It just says an idea and you are supposed to be able to apply that in your mind to another idea. So here, the idea is of somebody passing you a lemon and then you making lemonade. What is this phrase really saying? It's meaning when something bad in life happens to you, make something good out of it, okay? So this is an example of where metaphors get a bit trickier because you really have to take one idea and completely impose it on a whole nother idea. You have to completely apply it to another idea, okay? Our last one is hyperbole. And hyperbole, I think, is one of the easiest ones because we use hyperbole all the time without noticing it. So hyperbole is just to exaggerate something to really make a point or to highlight a point. So an example is something like when we say, I was so hungry I could eat a cow. Well, we all know you're not really going to eat an entire cow, right? But we're exaggerating the amount that we could eat just to really highlight the fact that we're really hungry, okay? Another example of this is to say something like, there must be about 1 million people waiting in line. There's definitely not 1 million people waiting in line, but it really helps to make the point that there's so many, right? It feels like there's 1 million. Another example, it looks like you spent a fortune on that new watch, okay? So again, we are using language to really make a point, okay? Using that exaggerated language. Okay, now the next one I think is the trickiest one. This one's the toughest one to manage or to master really, and that is an analogy. So an analogy is really similar to a simile or a metaphor, except that it's a comparison between two things that are not the same that goes on for a while. So instead of just comparing one part of those two things to each other, you actually compare many parts. And this is confusing. So I'm going to read you my example and see if that helps, okay? So my example is a classic Forrest Gump quote right here. Life is like a box of chocolates. Sometimes you will choose one from the box expecting it to be delicious, and it will turn out to be a flavor that you hate. Sometimes the chocolate that looks the most plain turns out to be the most delicious. Sometimes if you eat too much chocolate, you start to feel sick, okay? So at the surface, this little paragraph is all about chocolate in a box and eating chocolate. But it's not really. The other thing that it's talking about is life. And are life and a box of chocolates actually the same? No, they're really different things, but we're using one to make a point about the other. So what could this little analogy about chocolate really be telling us about life? That's the thing we always have to be thinking of in the back of our minds. So let's have a little peek down here. Okay. And I'm sorry because I know that the writing on my slides gets really little. That's why I post the PowerPoint just on its own as well, so you can actually play it big size. Okay, if we break this up a little bit, what can this kind of explain to us about life? So first, sometimes you will choose one from the box expecting it to be delicious, and it turns out to be a flavor that you hate. So a similar thing in life would be, sometimes in life, you think an experience is going to be really, really great, and then it turns out you don't actually enjoy it. Okay? Let's go on to our next one. Sometimes the chocolate that looks the most plain turns out to be the most delicious. Okay? So sometimes in life, an experience that seems like it's not going to be that good turns out to be one of the best ones. Maybe you go on a field trip to the desert and you think, I've been to the desert 1 million times, this is going to be boring. And it turns out to be the greatest time of your life, okay? Our next one, sometimes if you eat too much chocolate, you start to feel sick. Oh, what could that be saying if we're talking about life instead of chocolate? What's a similar kind of thing? So for this one, I would say sometimes if you try to fit too many experiences into a day, or you try to accomplish too much, you get overwhelmed and you start to feel kind of stressed out. Okay, so this is a great example of an analogy. It sounds like we're talking about a box of chocolates, but if we know that the other thing we're really talking about is life, then we can start to sort of get a message from this little paragraph about the box of chocolates that really applies to our lives, okay? Again, analogy is a tricky one, so don't panic if you're still feeling a bit nervous about that. Okay, now, this is the fun part. We're going to put analogy aside, unless it's the little bit you want to try. But for now, don't worry about it. But the fun bit is using simile, metaphor, and hyperbole, which are the three that we should have a pretty good handle on. You're going to write a riddle poem that describes a common household item without saying what the item is, okay? So you need to come up with ways to represent and describe that item only by comparing it to other things, okay? You cannot say like, I am white, I am about the size of your hand, I get lit on fire, oh, I'm a candle. You can't do it that way. That's not a riddle poem. So here's an example. I am soft like a cloud. I can be beautiful like a peacock or plain as a chicken. I am a supportive friend for your head. I lounge on couches like a lazy cat. Some people have 1,000,000 of me, and some people have none. I can be big like a car or small like a sandwich. What am I? What do you think that is? What is that that's being described here? I'm going to go ahead and tell you the answer for this one. Ta-da! I am a couch pillow. I am a couch pillow. Okay, so this is exactly what we're doing. We're trying to describe something by describing other things that are sort of similar. So again, I wouldn't have wanted to say, I am made out of fabric. I am fluffy. You put your head on me. No, 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 no. We have to describe this item only by using our similes and our metaphors and comparing it to something else, okay? So let's see. These are the expectations for your riddle poems, okay? First, your poem must be at least 6 lines long. And remember, if you're confused about what that word line means, go back to our little lesson about poetry lingo, okay? A line of poetry is one line, and then you go down and you start your next line. The next expectation, poems must include at least one simile, one metaphor, and one example of hyperbole, okay? Each of your poems has to have one of those things in it. Then the poem must include 2 more of your choice. So you could have 2 more similes, 2 more metaphors, 2 more hyperboles, or 1 simile and 1 more metaphor, whatever you like. So in total, you should have 5. Holy smokes, I'm really struggling with my counting today. 5 examples of figurative language, and at least 1 simile, 1 metaphor, and 1 example of hyperbole. The very last expectation for your riddle poems is that the poem must end with the question, what am I? Okay? It must. That's part of the expectation. So, this is your task. You're going to create 2 riddle poems about a household item, or, and I just snuck this in there for a little challenge, an emotion. That would be a tricky one. Can you describe like the emotion happiness? Or can you describe the emotion of fear? This, I think, would be a really good challenge. But if that seems a bit nerve-wracking, just start with a household item, okay? Be ready to share at least one of your riddle poems at our sharing circle at 1 p.m. Be ready to share one, and be ready to read it so that people can try and guess your riddle, because that's really the most fun part. We have a few optional extensions for today. So optional extension number 1, which really I should have called it number 1 because it's confusing if it's called 3, but it doesn't matter. They're optional. Write a short paragraph explaining the sports team analogy on the following slide. Okay. Optional extension number 2, create an analogy riddle poem which compares two things in a number of ways. So I'm going to show you the little hints on how to do these two things, okay? So this right here is the little test your skills in terms of understanding analogies. So write a short paragraph explaining how each part of this analogy about being on a sports team is similar to being part of a family, okay? And this is the little blurb, I guess. This is the little analogy that you would be writing your paragraph about. So, being part of a family is like being on a sports team. Sometimes you need to pass the ball a lot to score a goal. Sometimes you need to listen to your coach, even though you're not sure they are choosing the right play. Sometimes you need to put somebody into the game, even if they're not the best player. Okay, so this is all about playing on a sports team. But if you read between the lines, it's also all about how to be part of a family, how to be a good member in your family. So on a sports team, sometimes you need to pass the ball a lot to score a goal. What would be like the equivalent of passing the ball a lot to score a goal in a sports team to something in a family? What would sort of be the same thing? Okay, what could that mean if you're talking about being in a family instead of being in a sports team? This is a really great little test your knowledge. Give it a shot. Write a nice little paragraph explaining what each part of this analogy means if you're thinking about it as being part of a family instead. Good little test if you're up for it. The next one is to write the analogy poem. So let's have a peek at that. Okay, so this is an example of an analogy poem. Again, it's taking two things that are not the same and writing about one to describe the other. So in an analogy poem, differently from our riddle poems, you would just compare two things and you would compare them a number of times to show the similarities. So the example is, I'm a black panther, shiny and slim. My sharp teeth snap angrily at anything in my path. My fangs pierce the flesh of many foes at once. Once locked in my jaw, my enemies can never escape. What am I? I'm going to give you the answer. Dun da da! I am a stapler. Okay, so we can see a black panther and a stapler. Not the same, but as we explore the analogy between them, we can come up with similarities of one thing that help describe the other, okay? So if you're feeling up to the challenge, try writing an analogy poem as your third one, which is tricky. Okay, so you will be expected to come to the meeting at 1, our Zoom meeting, to present one of your riddle poems and have people take a guess and see if they can solve it. So the trickier poem, the better. We'll see how people do. And please upload your one poem to our assignment tab, okay? The one that you choose to read, or if you'd like me to see both of them, go ahead and upload both of them to the assignment tab. I will also be creating an assignment tab for anybody who writes the little explanation of the analogy, but remember that's an extension assignment and you do not need to do it. Okay, perfect. I'll see you at 1. Have a great day, everybody.